Welcome to Turning Moments into Movements, where each week we explore simple but powerful wellbeing tips to help you live a balanced and fulfilling life. My name's Leanne Ross, your host and the founder and coach of my business, Happyluia, and I will be taking you through today's 15 minutes of insight and inspiration. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. This week's episode is all going to be about 5 ways to identify, track and familiarise yourself with your triggers. Now, triggers is something that a lot of people are more familiar with now. It's something that we readily talk about. It's something that seems to come into our dialogue a lot more, which is really positive because we really want to be as aware of our triggers and normalise this conversation because it inevitably happens to every single person on this planet. So what do I actually mean when I'm talking about triggers? So triggers are responses in the mind and the body that are caused through the 5 senses. So it can be, we could maybe see something and it immediately triggers us, hear something, feel something, taste. What's the other one that I'm missing out on? Oh my gosh, touch, taste, feel, hear and see. There we go. And triggers can be positive. We can be triggered by a happy memory. So for example, it could be that you're driving in the car and you hear this song come on the radio and it's the best song ever. It takes you back to a time in your life where you really had fun, you really enjoyed yourself. It was maybe like a song that was played on the radio when you were on holiday. It could also be that you smell something that really just reminds you of something. An example of that could be lavender for me. I love lavender. I love the smell of it. It always makes me feel really relaxed and calm. So triggers by all means can be positive. But generally when we're talking about triggers, they are more negative. So it's that negative reaction that we're looking for. So that negative response in the mind or the body that is triggered by our 5 senses. And typically it is linked to a traumatic experience or a set of traumatic experiences. So for example, it could be that you see someone on the street and they just look like that teacher who used to give you a really hard time in school. It could be that you suddenly sort of feel something. It could be like feeling a bit of fabric and it immediately takes you back to a time where you were like, oh my gosh, my bully used to wear that fabric and they, I could always feel it when they were like, grabbing at me or something like that. So triggers are something that's really, really common. It's our brain storing information in order to help us to prompt memory recall and also to keep us safe. So they're really, really useful, but they can also be really, really challenging. So I am going to do a few different episodes on this. We will be covering how to manage your triggers. But for the purposes of today, we will just be focusing on how to identify them, how to track them, and how to almost give yourself a little bit more predictability if you can around your triggers. Because I guess the main challenge with triggers is they can come on all of a sudden. Sometimes we can't even make sense of them. We just suddenly feel unsafe. We don't, we're maybe like our mind's racing, our body's reacting to something. And sometimes we don't even know what that is. So having the power to identify at least some of your triggers is really going to help to re-establish that feelings of safety, because you're going to just have a bit more understanding around why you're triggered. I always say knowledge is power. So the more knowledge we have, the more power we have to start to manage them and start to kind of understand them a bit more, and really give yourself that empowerment to take control when when you don't feel in control, because triggers can really cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of upset. So this episode, I really hope, will be kind of almost like a starting point around you taking more control of the triggers that you are experiencing in your life. So that's just a little bit of a background. As I say, there's so much to cover around triggers, so I will be doing future episodes on different areas. But let's just jump into the first one around how to best identify, track, and familiarise yourself with your own triggers. So the first one would be to really pay attention to your physical and emotional reactions. So when you've been triggered, your physical reactions could be that you start to have heart palpitations, so start having a racing heart, you might start to shake, you might experience profusely sweating, you might start to fidget and just generally feel a little bit more jittery. So that's just some of the physical sensations to look out for, and paying attention to that. Paying attention to your physical reactions to certain things, that can really help to give you a clue around you being triggered. For the emotional part, that can be when you are feeling really upset. You might feel suddenly really angry or irritable. You might feel quite vulnerable. And typically this is when we will, our body and our mind will go into trauma responses. So another episode that I will be covering, but trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn. Don't worry too much, we're not going to dive into that today, but really that immediate reaction of like, oh my gosh, I feel really angry, I feel like I really want to like punch something because I feel so frustrated at whatever has just triggered me. Or oh gosh, I feel so overwhelmed, I just need to leave the room. So those physical and emotional sensations are really, really helpful to take note, because it gives us a cue that we have been triggered in some way, shape or form. The second one is start to identify patterns of being triggered. And you can do this both looking at the past, present and future. So identifying patterns of being triggered, it could include reflecting on previous experiences. So has there been specific incidents where you haven't felt safe in yourself? You've had that kind of sudden lurch in your stomach, where you think, oh my gosh, like I don't know why, but suddenly I don't feel okay. And reflecting on previous incidents can give you some insight. So it could be that every single time you walk into a crowded room, you suddenly feel really triggered. And there could be reasons for that. Once again, another episode. But this is something that can really be helpful to take note on. So really reflecting on previous incidents around experiences that have led to you feeling triggered in the past. Similarly, has there been repeated incidents? So do you feel triggered at the same type of thing every time? So it could be that a specific colleague in the workplace that you don't get on with, every single time you see them, you just get triggered. You have that lurch in your stomach, you start to kind of have that heart palpitations, you start feeling unsafe. So that's another one to watch out for. When we're looking at the third one, this is more about tracking. So keeping a journal, and I have done an episode on journaling, so make sure you check that out. That can be really, really helpful to understand and track what your triggers specifically are. So I would encourage you to break this down into 3 different ways. So the first one would be to record your thoughts. The second one would be, so that's focusing on the mind. The second one would be to record your feelings. So that's more around the body. So does your body feel quite angry and frustrated? Do you feel quite clenched up? Or does it feel quite, scared and anxious? You may be quite shaky, a little bit jittery. I then want you to journal about the patterns of behaviour. So in effect, journaling around step 1 and 2. So what has led to that trigger that you feel you could maybe unpick? Has there been repeated incidences? As I say, is it a case of when you see that colleague in the workplace, you immediately start to feel triggered? And we can make sense of all these triggers, in a later episode as well. But as I say, we're just focusing on identifying them today. The fourth step I'd like to cover is to speak about it. So talk about it with someone that you trust, whether that's a professional, so a coach, therapist, counsellor, or whether it's with, a personal relationship, family, friends, colleagues, partner, husband, wife. Having regular conversations around times when you have been specifically triggered can be really powerful, because you have someone who can also share their insight. They can also help to prompt your memory. There's been times where I've spoken about something that's made me feel really uncomfortable, and the person I've told, because they know me so well, they've said things like, "Oh gosh, that's happened to you before, hasn't it?" Or, "Oh, do you think that's the reason, that you've been triggered, because I remember you talking about this before." So having that gentle accountability can be really, really helpful, because they can help to support you to identify your triggers and repeated patterns of being triggered as well. The last one is to engage in mindfulness and meditation. Sometimes there will be times where you'll have been triggered and you don't know why. You just simply don't know. You suddenly had this overwhelming feeling, and you just didn't know where that came from. It can be really helpful to just sit in a quiet room where you feel really safe. So preferably after you've been triggered. I wouldn't suggest doing it during that time when you're feeling really triggered. Take a moment and really reflect, okay, what was going on for me there? What happened? Why was I feeling that way? And just sit and see if anything comes up. This has been a really helpful tactic for me. I remember once I was really triggered. I was traveling, I was backpacking on my own, and suddenly I just felt really unsafe, and I knew I had been triggered, but I didn't know why. So I literally went to a coffee shop, got myself a coffee, sat down, and literally meditated on it. And I literally went through every single trigger I could think of. I was like, have I been triggered by this? Was it when I passed that shop? Was it when I smelled that smell? Like, what happened? And it was quite a quirky experience, going through that kind of, step by step of what happened before. It was very analytical, but it really gave me insight around what had happened to me in those moments. And it gave me greater understanding because I'd given myself that space to explore that thoroughly. So, to recap, 5 ways to identify, track, and familiarise yourself with your triggers are: 1, to notice your physical and emotional sensations. 2, to identify your patterns of behaviour. 3, to keep a journal. 4, to speak about it. And then 5, to practice mindfulness and meditation. As I've mentioned a few times, I will do several episodes on triggers, how to manage it, how to obviously identify it, which we've just covered. I'll jump into the trauma parts as well. So I would really encourage you to dive into all of them, because it's such a big topic, and what you find is it can almost feel really overwhelming. You know, you might be listening to this and almost feel a bit frustrated and be like, oh, for goodness sake, you've told me how to identify it, but I want to know how to manage it, or I want to know how to control it, or I want to know why this has happened, why I've been triggered. I promise you I will do future episodes on this, but taking this little steps at a time is going to be most effective, because we don't want to trigger ourselves over this whole topic and become overwhelmed and then just not feel able to manage it. So let me know if you have any questions, if you have any specific queries around triggers, to make sure that I can cover them in future episodes. I would also encourage you to engage in a bit of self-care after this episode. Talking about triggers can be really challenging, so doing that and giving yourself that bit of space to reflect on anything that's come up for you is going to be really helpful. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to chatting to you in the next episode. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Turning Moments into Movements. Why not check out coaching opportunities with me so you can really begin to enhance your moments into huge movements and begin to live the life you never thought possible? Details are in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, leave a review and share this episode. Remember to also follow me on social media platforms through my handle Happyluya, where you will receive additional daily content. And finally, make sure you join us next week for more tips on how you can turn your small moments into life-changing movements.